I know a lot of you know this, but just a reminder, the depot in a community was for many years the most important building in town. Everything came and went through the depot up until the automobile took over. So your depots are very historical and very important in a community, and just like this, it's so important that they were saved. And we're very fortunate in Hearne, and I'll tell you that story as we go along. But we're going to put our gears in rewind first, all right? Back up a long way. Over in England, the railroads are getting started, just getting going. Okay, it's me. There we go. The Livermore and Manchester Railroad sponsors a contest for the best steam locomotive built. And they have 6 entries. And they test all of them on track. And the winner is this locomotive right here, Stephenson's Rocket. Now, I wonder what concept do those people in 1929, when they hear the word rocket, what do they think of? I mean, I really wonder that. I wonder back that far. They have no concept of rocket like we have a concept of rocket, but this is where it starts right here. This is considered the first modern steam locomotive because it had all the elements that, if we can call a steam locomotive modern, okay? All the elements of the modern steam locomotive. I'm going to try to point these out. Okay, right there is the firebox. You have in there here some horizontal tubes that the steam is produced through them, go into the cylinder, the piston. The piston is attached directly to the drive wheel. The exhaust from the piston goes up through the smokestack, which creates a draft through the entire locomotive, which helps the fire get hotter. So all of this is part of the first modern steam locomotive back to 1829. Now I'm going to hit you with some dates. Don't try to remember any of the dates. Just try to get a feel of the flow of railroading. That's really what we're looking at, the flow of railroading. Now, one thing I want you to notice here, and just mention this as an aside, transporting people was an afterthought. The first plan, the first ideas for railroads were goods, merchandise, not people. But this is an example of one of the first passenger cars. All they did was take stagecoaches and put them on wheels behind the steam locomotive. 1829, your first modern steam locomotive. And then that brings us to, if we can go in the right direction, that's me, not anybody else. There it is. Okay. This is one of your early Texas Central steam locomotives. This picture is in Hearne, Texas. I do want to point out this man in the middle. His name was James McGuire. He lived in Hearne. I have a number of items that his family has donated to the depot. I have his conductor hat and some other things and pictures of him. I didn't know anything about him other than this picture and the things that were donated. This past year, his granddaughter visited the depot. And she came in and we were talking and she said, "Do you know the story about my grandfather in this picture?" I said, "No, all I know is the picture." And she said, "My grandfather died right here in this depot." And I said, "Wait a minute." And she said, he worked his shift that day and he got off work. He came in the depot to get his jacket and had a heart attack right here. Said his father was working outside for the railroad. They grabbed his father and brought him in immediately. He died in his father's arms right here in the depot. That kind of changed my outlook on this guy and his picture. James McGuire, one of the early steam locomotives of the Houston and Texas Central Railroad. Ma'am? My wife is here to keep me on task. And if I say something wrong, she's correcting me, so don't worry about it, okay?
So we tell the stories
Tell the stories.
of the depot.
Yeah, that's, we were asked about 4 years ago, if we would help keep the depot open. What we have tried to do is collect stories, not the stuff, but the stories behind the stuff. Because that's really what is more interesting. Now, I've got a lantern there that I could tell you a great story about a little lady that brought it in who was raised in Pennsylvania. And she was a child, and she would go out to the tracks behind her house. And one day she went out, and one of the workers had left his lantern sitting on the ground. She picked it up and brought it home, and her daddy let her keep it. That was 70 years ago. She has kept that lantern all these years and wanted to donate it to the depot. I pick it up and look at it. It has Pennsylvania lines, you know, stamped on the top in the metal. And what is more amazing is the glass globe has the Pennsylvania logo, Pennsylvania Railroad logo, still on it. She has kept that lantern for about 70 years and took care of it. And, you know, it's a story. It's not the lantern. It's the story behind it. And that's what we are trying to collect so much of the depot. That's what I appreciate about this picture. It's not just a picture, it's his story and the things that he did. My mouth gets real dry when I start talking. I'm going to have to stop every so often and take a drink. I know. Okay. The Houston and Texas Central got its start with a charter in 1848 by Ebenezer Allen. And at the time when he got the charter, he called it the Galveston and Red River Railroad. That kind of got him in a little bit of trouble with his family. The Allen family, his fathers, brothers, uncles, were founders of Houston. And the merchants of Houston were not real happy that he is starting a railroad that has Galveston's name in it, because Galveston already had a railroad. The Galveston people didn't want it, but he made the mistake to name it Galveston and Red River, and he ends up changing it, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But Ebenezer Allen, part of the Allen family, was the founders of Houston. 1848, he gets the charter from the state. They had to get a charter before they could start their railroad. We may never get past
He didn't practice.
the white button. All right, now if I want to go back, I'm sorry, y'all.
Okay, there you go. But
I think I've got it. Okay, right here. All right, 1853, he gets the charter for the Galveston and Red River. About 3 years later, 37 different railroads have received charters in Texas. There are only 40 miles of track that had been laid. They had already reached Cypress City, which was 25 miles, so that means that all these 36 others had laid 15 miles of track between them. And in 1856 is when he finally changes and calls it the Houston and Texas Central rather than the Galveston and Red River. Why did it take so much time for these people to get started? We got to remember, railroading, more so than probably any other industry, most of your investment is up front. When do you start making money with a railroad? When you deliver merchandise from one place to another. But if you don't have the track going from one place to another, you can't deliver anything. So most of your investment is up front before you even have a railroad. You have to get money to buy the track. The track has to be ordered from up east. It has to get on a boat, come all the way down to Galveston and be unloaded and be taken. So it took them forever to get the stuff, plus to have the money up front to do it, because it wasn't something that people were just ready to give them money to do. So where does the money come from? That's the first question. And who pays for the railroads? Is it the railroad itself? Do they pay for everything? Is it the communities that are being served? Do we hit them up for money to build the railroad to their city? Is it the state that pays you for the railroad? And there was a lot of interest in the state being the one. Is it the federal government that pays for it and provides the money to get started? Or is it done some other way, say through stocks and bonds and whatever? But that was the first problem these railroad people had, was getting the upfront money to get started. And it was a very serious problem for Ebenezer Allen. And we have found a book put out by the Friends of Texas History. But eventually through the state, it works over time. The state is going to end up giving 10,420 acres to a railroad for every mile that is laid, providing the railroad laid 25 miles of track in the last 2 years. And over time, and we're talking, probably 40, 50, 60 years here, over 32 million acres of Texas land was given away to the railroads to help them finance the railroad. They would take this property, most of it out in West Texas where nobody lived, and they would sell it for a nickel an acre. Whatever they could get for that land, they would sell it to make money to get started so they could pay for the track and the workers to get the railroad going. That 32 million acres was only 20% of Texas. So it's still a whole lot of Texas left, but that was one of the main ways that your railroads, they did this up in the other states first, and then Texas said, well, we better do the same thing. So the Houston and Texas Central Railroad, 1856, becomes the second major railroad across Texas. We found this book, that's what I mentioned just a second ago, put out by the Friends of Texas Historical Society, True Stories of Old Houston and Houstonians, written by S.O. Young. And he's got this early chapter describing the railroads come to Houston. And he describes some of the issue with Paul Bremond. We've all heard the name Bremond from the community, which is named after Paul. But Paul Bremond was the head of the Houston and Texas Central building to begin. And he's the one that had to deal with all the issues. And I've asked my wife to give me a break, and she's going to read just one paragraph of what Mr. Young, or Dr. Young, says about Paul Bremond. He really likes it. It's going to be obvious.
Just as the Harrisburg Road got under good headway, the Houston and Texas Central got into the game. The first shovel of dirt for this road was thrown by the great railroad genius, Paul Bremond, in 1853. When he threw up that dirt, he turned up more trouble for himself than generally falls to the lot of one man. You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
He was a wonderful man, and he did not hesitate at times to attempt the apparently impossible. When his first contractor got cold feet and threw up his job, Mr. Bremond promptly undertook to carry out the contract to build the road himself. There is where his troubles began.
There is where his troubles began. His first trouble was money. He was able to buy the products that he needed to get them there, but he didn't have enough money left to pay his workers. So you've got the paragraph in there that reads, on one occasion, several hundred of the Irishmen, workers, went in a body to his residence. They yelled and hooted and made lots of noise, but finally contented themselves with tearing down his fence and carrying away the pieces. So imagine what that would have been like. One more sentence.
Okay. There were no fences along the right-of-way, and as there were thousands of cattle on the prairies and woods where the road ran, the tracks were generally filled with them every few miles. As soon as the trains would get out of the city limits, the whistle would begin tooting, and this was kept up almost without cessation. Of course, a great many cattle were killed, and this led to bitter warfare between the cattlemen and the railroads.
That's another problem now. Not only not paying his workers or not having the money, but dealing with the cattlemen for all the cattle get killed on the way. But what you've got here is, we've already seen this map. I won't spend as much time on it, but I want to show you the progression of the Houston and Texas Central Railroad. It starts out in Harrisburg. It goes up to Cypress City in 1856. That's 25 miles from the point of origin. Okay, it takes them another 5 years to make it to Milliken. They are forced to stop in Milliken because the Civil War begins. And I've read stories about some of these Civil War outfits that were recruited in certain areas, reporting to Milliken to get on the train and go as a group down to Galveston to get on the boat to go over to New Orleans to head out to wherever they were needed as soldiers. But Milliken was a thriving place for a while during the war. After the war, you know about Reconstruction and what a hard time that was. But finally, 1867, they do purchase the Washington Railroad, which was from Hempstead to Brenham. And that had already been built. They purchased that and decide we're going to keep this railroad going toward Austin. So they are continuing now in two directions, one up to Dallas and one over to Austin. So 1869, they make it to Hearne. There is no Hearne, okay? All it is farmland. So they keep on going. I'll tell you more about Hearne later. But they make it to that point in 1869. They keep going up to Corsicana, 1871. They make it to Dallas. Oh, they also make it to Austin in 1871. And then on up to Dallas in 1872. There it is. And continue going up to Red River City, which they think is about part of Denison today, and connect with the MK&T, which finally gives them a connection to St. Louis and the rest of the railroad world over to the east. So in 1873, finally, Houston and Galveston and really Austin are finally connected to the rest of the United States, which is extremely important and does really promote the growth of not only those big cities, but I wonder personally, and I wish there was some way to find out, how many of these communities, I know you can't read that, but you can see all the names of the communities, how many of those didn't even exist before the railroad got there? Some of them were just little hamlets, little villages, that until the railroad got there, and then they began to grow and expand and become real places. So we get up to 1892. The Houston and Texas Central reports in 1892 that it has 872 miles of track completed. It's made $1 million that year in passenger traffic, $2.5 million that year in freight traffic. It owns 115 locomotives. and has 2,271 pieces of rolling stock. So we're looking at what, 40 years about? It has grown to be a pretty major railroad in this part of the country. What effect does that have on Texas itself? Look at the mileage of track. In 1856, there are 40 miles of track in Texas. In 1870, that has jumped way up to 511. Doesn't sound like much, but it's really quite a bit. But look at 1890. It's gone from 500 miles of track to 8,700. After the Civil War, many of your southern workers, farmers are displaced. They're looking for a place where there is land that's free and cheap, and Texas is a place. So many of them are on their way to Texas to begin living here. Many people from outside of the United States are coming to Texas. Your Polish communities, your German communities are all heading to Texas to make settlements because land is available and it's cheap. By 1910, it's increased even more, up to 12,900 miles of track. Those two towns in Houston and Dallas. 1850, just looking at Houston real quick, it doubles in size in 1860 just about, doubles again in 1870, and continues to increase when the railroads are developing out of there to just 16,000 in 1880. But look at Dallas. 430, the asterisk is there because they don't know. That's the estimate. 2,000 in 1860. Again, that is an estimate of how many people were in Dallas. Now, the 1870 number is a census, and you can see that Dallas is starting to grow, but 1872, remember, is when the railroad reaches Dallas. And look what happens to Dallas between 1870 and 1880. All of a sudden, Dallas is almost tripled, or more than tripled in size. So it's becoming, so the railroad had that effect not just on your big towns, but all the communities. When the railroad gets there, life changes. And it changes in most cases for the better. Not always, but in most cases. So what happens to the Houston and Texas Central? In 1934, the Houston and Texas Central officially becomes part of the Southern Pacific and no longer exists. So no more Houston and Texas Central, it's Southern Pacific. What happens to the Southern Pacific? In 1996, the Southern Pacific becomes part of the Union Pacific, and it no longer exists. Today in Hearne, you had the old International Great Northern, which became the Missouri Pacific, which is also today Union Pacific. So Union Pacific is, we don't like Union Pacific, all right?
No, we don't.
I mean, I won't go any further than that, really, other than those of us in Hearne, we lost the Southern Pacific and the Missouri Pacific when it all became Union Pacific, and we loved those first railroads. So we're not real happy. We're not real happy. But it's the way of progress, once again. It's a little bit about Hearne then. And that's what she said. Linda said, I grew up in Hearne, and I did. We moved to Hearne when I was 10. My father was the head football and baseball coach at Hearne from 1958 to 1971. And most of the kids that I grew up with, their fathers worked for the railroad in one way or another. Back in those days, they lived in Hearne and traveled to the other cities. Today, they live in Houston, Fort Worth, Longview, San Antonio, and come to Hearne and spend the night or whatever and go back the next day. But it's amazing to me that that hasn't changed. You still have 4 crews that in the day in Hearne spend the night at the Baymont Hotel right there in Hearne and get their turn around and will go back the next day, hopefully on a train, but sometimes in a car. Still in Hearne. So Hearne's still a very important railroad town, even though most of the things we're going to look at right here aren't there. Hearne is mainly a cotton area. The Brazos Valley is some of the richest farmland in the state of Texas. Go on with my slide. Yes, ma'am. Oh, cotton, look at that. They raise, mostly it's cotton. The problem with cotton before the railroad was getting the cotton to the market in Galveston. The roads were horrendous, especially if it rained, which it did quite often back in those days, particularly in the Houston area, and those roads are muddy and soggy. It would take the Hearne area, Brazos Valley farmers, almost a month to get their crops to the Galveston ship places and to get back. So one of the large landowners in Hearne, his name is Hearne. He hears word that they're talking about building a railroad into Texas, so he gets up to Houston. He meets with those people.
Show them their picture.
Oh, I don't want to show them a picture yet, it'll scare them. I don't want you to think this is a Halloween picture, all right? This is Mr. and Ms. Hearne. He gets up to Houston, and he meets, I guess, with Paul Bremond or whoever, and offers to give him 700 acres of land if they will come through his farm area. And they do, because they realize that this spot is a halfway spot between Houston and Dallas. And that's going to be a pretty pivotal spot for the railroad crews. So the railroads then lay out the town of Hearne, and just a little overhead picture, another one of those 1939, and all I want you to see here, we'll look at this in more detail later, is the railroad laid out the town and sold the properties. They named the town Hearne after the farmers who gave them this land. And you've got your Southern Pacific going, I don't know if I can do this. How do I get the arrow to come up? Top button? Yeah. That's your Southern Pacific track there. There's your Missouri Pacific track here. And you got your right over here is the cotton compress, where all that cotton would come into Hearne and be compressed into bales and then shipped out. And 1939, cotton. They needed a place to get their cotton to the market quicker than by wagon. So the railroads do that. They're able to do what took them a month earlier to do it in a day with the railroads loaded up. This is a shot of the Houston yard and some of the cotton crops that have come in. And the actual picture is a little bit bigger than what I have here. But just to get an idea, if you can see that, all of those flat cars are loaded with bales of cotton. The Hearne Depot Eating House and Tower. In 1901, you have this being built. It's not the first depot in Hearne, but it also includes, you see the tower right there. Across the tracks, you see the depot right here. This is an open area here, covered area. This is what they call an eating house. Now, I've never heard it referred to as an eating house before, but in the descriptions and the blueprints, they call it an eating house. And I have just a paragraph of an article from the Houston newspaper in 1901 that says so-and-so, and I forget his name, but president of the H&TC Railroad went to Hearne yesterday to check on the new depot and eating house. And he reports that they are the finest on the line, and they even have electricity. So that is a eating house and depot. That's one of the things that Hearne has and had. The tower was torn down very early in the 1900s, and the interlocker was moved into the depot. So that's the first building that's gone, was that tower. Hearne used to have a 10-stall roundhouse. And I can't find a picture of the roundhouse except guys in front of it, workers. This is one picture I've found. You can see the roundhouse behind them. Those locomotives that came in from Dallas, Houston, had to be serviced, and the men would spend the night or whatever and get their locomotives serviced and then go back after they're ready. So the roundhouse would turn the locomotive around, do the servicing inside, and then take off back home the next day. It's another picture of the roundhouse. That is the other, I'm sorry. Picture of the roundhouse crew. I love this picture. I've had this picture blown up, and it's sitting on a tripod as you come in, simply because you can look at that picture. Can you tell which three guys do all the work? One of the older railroaders said this man that's sitting on that thing is probably tied into the turntable, and that's what they would use to turn it back then, by hand. Now, I don't know if that's true. He's a railroader. He knows a lot more about it than I do. But if you could look close, you'd see those steam engines in there are Houston and Texas Central. I think there's one Galveston, Red River. But you had a 10-stall roundhouse. We cannot find out when it was torn down. I talked with a girl whose father was the roundhouse foreman. So, do you know when they tore it down? And she looked at me and said, no. I have a 1958 phone book somebody gave us, and it has a phone number for the roundhouse foreman. I don't remember the roundhouse at all, but I do have a picture here, and I will show you 39 where part of it's still there. But Hearne had a roundhouse. This is a turntable. It was still there in the 80s. The roundhouse is gone. I took this picture in the 80s, went over there one day, and I had no idea where the roundhouse exactly was, but I look at this picture and I look at another picture, and I'm standing where the front of the roundhouse would be. And you see the turntable, the diesel's about to get on that turntable, and off in the distance in the right-hand corner, you can see the depot towers. They're way over there. But you'll see there's still the locomotives, the diesels are being serviced here in this area still, but there's no roundhouse. I talk to people about the Hearne icing rack, and they look at me like they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. So I found this picture of a refrigerator car, and I've done some research. This refrigerator car started up in Chicago. Your Chicago meat market wanted to be able, these people that butcher all the cattle up there, wanted to be able to ship their product further than just the city of Chicago. So they started off getting a boxcar, regular boxcar, putting some ice in it, and putting the meat in it and trying to ship it off, but those boxcars, kind of like shipping something in an oven. You know, the meat would be cooked by the time it got there, so they come up, Armour builds this special built boxcar. It is insulated all the way around. On each end, there are two metal containers that hold ice. There are fans inside, rotating fans tied into the wheels, so when the refrigerator car is moving, those fans are moving the air around a little bit inside, and it's able to keep the inside of that car cold enough so it can ship meat, produce, anything that needs to be kept cold. But what happens to the ice in those containers? They're going to melt. So they put hatches on top of each one of those containers, and it can pull into an icing rack, which Hearne had for many years.
How often did they need to get the ice?
How often did they need? I've read where it's 24 to 30 hours, kind of depending on where they were. This summer, it would have been about every 3 hours. But this is a picture of the Hearne icing rack near its end. They tore it down in 1973. There used to be a platform right down here. And there was a ramp that the big blocks of ice would go up there. And they would go on a conveyor all the way down the whole length. We found a picture, just a miraculous picture right here, from a 1940 article in Life magazine about how the cantaloupe that was raised in California was shipped all the way to the East Coast. It shows, it's a picture article. It shows them picking the cantaloupe out in California and taking it to the warehouse and it being loaded into these refrigerator cars. And in the middle of the article, there is this picture. 30 tons of ice crashed down into car bunkers from the long deck at Hearne, Texas, to make up for the loss by melting since re-icing at Del Rio. Frequent check of bunkers and re-icing guard fruit against heat throughout the journey. So you can see right here, the icing rack, you can see the chain, the conveyor belt is right here, goes the whole length. There are blocks of ice that are on it. They're moved all the way down. Those guys have tongs that grab the ice and pull it off where it's needed. They have tools like this guy. It's a kind of a point that they push those big old blocks of ice over. These guys have opened the hatches, and I want you to notice that he is standing on a hatch. And you can get an idea how thick that insulation is in that car from what he's standing on. And they have these big heavy forks, and we have one of those in the depot. Yeah, we have a pick and a fork that they move the ice and chip the ice into small enough pieces to fit into that hatch, into that container, and refill it, close the hatch, go down the next car, and work the train.
Do they have release valves at the bottom to let out excess water, or did it just evaporate off?
I think they had valves. I think they just had a drain. But I'm not, when I was going to college in the late 60s, my summer job was at the Hearne Ice House. 3 summers I worked there, and we made 300-pound blocks of ice, crushed it, bagged it, delivered it to stores. But we also delivered between 100 and 150 300-pound blocks of ice over to the railroad every day.
Was that natural ice or was it refrigerated?
That was ice that we made in big old metal containers. It was called white ice. It wasn't clear ice. That took longer. The white ice just still had all the air in it. And that's what made ice. Like your ice cubes are white, they're not clear.
So how did you know where the ice needed to be on the icing rack?
I don't know. Why don't you tell them? I need to drink.
So they'd call ahead, the train would call ahead and notify the guys on the icing rack which cars were refrigerator cars that needed it. So that then when Bobby showed up with the ice truck, they'd direct him of where to deliver the ice so that they would, because you can see all the way down that icing rack, sometimes there's not a lot of people, but then there's others. And so just the logistics they were smart, dog.
Yeah, I always thought the whole train would be a refrigerated train, but that wasn't always right. It could be the 3rd car, the 8th car, and the 9th car. So they would know which cars, so they would pull the ice off the conveyor and have it ready, sitting there, melting until the train got there. When it got there, they were ready to go. I've talked with several people that worked on the icing rack. Okay? So the icing rack, we used to, I'm sorry. You know, I could kick myself. All the ice was made in the back. We didn't go back there. But they used ammonia. I know they used ammonia. I know they had these big old metal containers that made the 300-pound block. And they had crane to pick it up, turn it over, and it would come out. It would go through a conveyor type thing with a saw that would saw not all the way through, but score it lengthways and up and down so that when it got to where it was needed, they could chip it into 25 or 50-pound blocks much easier.
They froze it, it's just like a giant freezer they had in the back that went on.
Yeah. I know every so often there would be an ammonia leak, and those guys in the back would be piling up front, screaming and hollering, and we knew not to go around. We just didn't hang out in the back. Hurry. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I about got it. Hearne had a large car repair shed. This is the only picture I've been able to find of the car repair shed. That is it on the right. And that's where the cars that needed repairing, where they were repaired. It was about a 50-foot long building. It had a crane up here where they could pick things up and work on them. And we also had what they called the car knockers. I am pushing the button. That's the car knockers. Yeah, I'm sorry. Right there. These guys were they were the ones that did all the work in that shed. Okay? I want to show you, wrapping up, kind of show you where these things were. Okay? This is your overhead of Hearne. Right. I'm trying. Right there is the depot, right? Today, the depot is over here. The car repair shed is right there. The icing rack begins here and goes all the way off the screen. Right over here is the Southern Pacific Freight House. Over here is the Missouri Pacific Freight House. Right here is the roundhouse. Right there is the roundhouse. What happens is we get up to the 1990s, all that is left, all of this stuff is gone. The roundhouse is gone, turntable's gone, the car repair building is gone, the icing rack is gone. All that's left is the depot, and it hadn't been used in years. They're using it for storage. Union Pacific comes in, and they're going to tear it down. Because they have to, you can't really blame them. They have to pay taxes on it and liability. So they are about to tear down the depot, and the ladies of the Hearne Heritage Society find out about it. They get over there and meet with UP. UP says, well, you can have this building. We don't use it. We don't want it. You can have it. But you've got to get it up off of our property, which is a death sentence. I mean, you think they're going to pick up a big old 100-year-old building and move it. But these ladies were pretty determined, hard-headed, or whatever. And in 2001, they actually picked up a 100-year-old building and moved it across the highway and set it back down where it is today. I talked with the lady who was in charge of that. She said moving it was not the biggest deal. She said the bigger deal was the condition the inside of the building was when they got it. This is just one picture, but it was like this everywhere, she said. That the paint was peeling off the walls. It was painted in green. The windows were broken, boarded up. There were places where it had leaked through the roof and collapsed and it's all wood, it's not sheet rock. Well, you can see over on the right where it's leaked through, and it was in horrendous condition. So it took them 10 years to restore it. They opened it again in 2011, and as a museum, depot museum. And this is what it would look like today if you come. All right, a couple of pictures here. Go ahead.
And you'd be standing right there with your.
I will be taking you on a tour. But it's back to its original paint, its original layout, except for one minor, well, maybe major thing. I don't know if you can see right there on the right is an opening. When it was built in 1901, like every depot, you had two waiting rooms. You have a white waiting room, you have a black waiting room. That wall there on the right was a solid wall. When they restored it, they put that opening so we would have access to both sides. That side is a mirror image of this side. So this is in the what would be the white waiting room looking toward the restrooms. This would be in the other waiting rooms, black waiting room, looking toward the ticket window.
But you had a duplicate, you had a
Yeah.
ticket window on each,
Side and restrooms
and
on.
restrooms in each.
Just a
side.
mirror image. You see model trains there. We were determined to be hands-on as much as we could. So we like to let people touch things and feel things, and especially the kids. We have this Brio train. We let them run the model trains. I have a chair that this kid is sitting in that's up kind of high. I call the engineer's chair, and I'm able to give him a throttle that is tied into a power pack that is set at half speed. So he can't go 200 miles an hour. And they love running the trains. I had a father bring his son back a couple weeks ago. He came in and told me, he said, today is his birthday. I told him anywhere he wants to go, I will take him. He said he didn't take a second. He said he wants to go back to the depot and run trains. So his daddy brought him back to the depot to run trains. All right? I told the city we needed a viewing platform for people to have a place to sit and watch trains, and that's what
And
this
you're
is.
welcome to come and use the viewing platform anytime. That's on Highway, it's where you can see the trains and the trucks, gotta hurry.
And Bob, can we all put the picture in?
That's it.
Now,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you very much.
Thank y'all.